Welcome back everyone. I'm starting a new series, Pushing the Limits of Tesla, which will talk a lot about how to get to faraway places away from supercharger networks. So as you know, the supercharger network is pretty extensive in the US, but if you look in the top left corner, we'll zoom into BC here where I live, it gets pretty sparse. Recently this year, Tesla installed some superchargers up to Prince George in the center there, as you can see. But those are new this year. Other than that, the top half of BC is pretty much not covered by Tesla superchargers. So zooming into Vancouver Island where I live, you can see there's only a supercharger in Victoria and Nanaimo. So what if we want to get to places like on the North Island, Port McNeill, Port Hardy, San Joseph Bay, or Cape Scott, which are pretty amazing. It's about 450 kilometers from Nanaimo to San Joseph Bay there. And we'd like to go there. We did last year. Stay tuned and I'll show you how it's done. Before we get into the details, I'll show you some other spots that are hard to get to. North of Prince George now, up into Hudson Hope, Dobson Creek are challenging. A little bit easier now that there's superchargers up to Prince George. I'll show you some pictures of where we went last year. This is up near Chetwynd. This picture is up near Chetwynd, Dawson Creek area as well. This is up at Hudson Hope, where a lot of the power is generated to power our electric vehicles. This is an interesting shot near Dawson Creek, where we visit some wind turbines that are also generating power for our cars. Pretty amazing spots, but how do we get there? So the first thing you need to open up a lot of possibilities is the CHAdeMO adapter or the CCS adapter to allow the Teslas to use public charging stations that use different standards. So if we look at the Vancouver Island map again, you can see that with the public chargers, fast chargers available, that opens up a lot more possibilities. These chargers are typically only 50 kilowatt chargers compared to the up to 250 kilowatt chargers that Tesla has. And there's typically only about 2 chargers per location. So it's a bit more restrictive, but it definitely does open up some possibilities if you can charge there. Unfortunately, Tesla doesn't sell the CHAdeMO adapter anymore now, so everyone's waiting for the CCS adapter to come out. Some of the older vehicles also have to have some retrofits to their charging ports to be able to accept the CCS adapters apparently. The other thing you'll need to really push the limits of where you can go even beyond the third-party fast chargers is the full adapter kit for the mobile connector from Tesla, which I'll talk in a bit more detail about in another video when I talk about trips up in northern BC. For today we'll focus on the trips on the northern Vancouver Island and how you can get to some of those areas. So back to where we started. Let's say we wanted to get to some amazing places like this, which is on the northern Vancouver Island near Gold River, but how do we get there? Google Maps shows that it's about 350 kilometers one way for just over 4 hours. And the last supercharger, as we found from before, is in Nanaimo, BC. So we start by grabbing our CHAdeMO adapter in this case and entering the destination of Gold River in our nav on the Tesla. And off we go. Let's see what happens. So as usual throughout this drive, I'll show some clips. I'll be mostly on FSD Beta throughout the whole thing, seeing how it performs. Most of this, of course, is highway driving, so it won't really show the capabilities of FSD because the code hasn't been merged yet. So we'll most likely see a lot of the same disengagements that we used to see on autopilot. I'll run most of the video here on double speed just to keep it a little bit more interesting, and I'll point out some of the disengagements of interest along the way. So this first part's just coming out through town, which everyone's seen plenty of, so I won't really show much of that. Just standard navigation on FSD Beta, which is not the focus of this video. So let's jump to some highway driving and see how that looks. So most of the highway driving here that you can see is very standard. Pretty much like the old autopilot used to perform with Navigate on autopilot. But here's an interesting glitch that I hadn't seen before that seems to be new on FSD, which I was quite surprised at actually. So we're heading straight down the highway here. The navigation shows straight. It's a very obvious two-lane highway. very well marked, and for some reason the FSD turns into the right turn lane. It did this a number of times on the way up, and sometimes I disengaged it, sometimes I used a signal to get out of it again, but it would have probably turned off or tried to jump out of it last second. Very odd. So after about an hour and a half of driving here, we're getting close to the Nanaimo supercharger. So we pulled in here and started charging. Surprisingly, even though it's a 150 kilowatt max supercharger here in Nanaimo, we were only getting about 37 kilowatts. So we stopped for a coffee and decided to wait to see if it would speed up, but what had happened here is I forgot to navigate to the supercharger early enough, and my battery was apparently still cold from the drive, even though it had been an hour and a half. So without preheating the battery, the charge rate was quite limited. So I waited a few minutes but decided to head off before I really got the charge I wanted to get initially. Regardless, we continued on, and at our campsite we actually slept in the car. We had 3 of us sleeping in the car with the camp mode on, which keeps the temperature at a nice comfortable temperature all night. It does drop the charge, of course, a few percentage points overnight, but that's mostly fine if you have enough charge. So we continued on from the campsite in the morning towards Campbell River, planning to charge up at the BC Hydro Fast charger there. One of the really nice things about the Tesla is that it has a very accurate prediction of what the charge will be when you arrive at your destination, within a few percent. So here you can see that the car is predicting that we'll get to Campbell River with about 2% charge remaining, which after a lot of driving around, I'm still comfortable with to get to a location with that low of a charge. After we arrived at Campbell River, we actually ended up with about 6 kilometers of range remaining, which is the lowest I've ever pushed it to. One other trip when I went up to San Joseph Bay at Cape Scott a couple of years ago, I ended up back in Campbell River with 8 kilometers of charge remaining. So pretty fun to push it to those levels once you know how the car behaves. So I charged up in Campbell River with enough to get to Gold River and back because I hadn't tried the charger there yet. So the roads between Campbell River and Gold River are very twisty and turny, as you can see here. Speed limit's about 80 kilometers an hour, so typically I was setting it to 80 or 85, and this will clip a little bit slower, and putting it on FSD for pretty much the whole drive. So you can see here that FSD is actually really handling these roads well. It's speeding up and slowing down for the turns when needed in a very realistic way, just like a normal driver would. I drove this road a couple times on autopilot, navigate on autopilot with that code, and it definitely wasn't as good as this. It would often come into turns way too fast and then usually recover, but in a very uncomfortable way for the passengers. So this is quite a bit better. You can see some of the beautiful scenery here. This is Upper Campbell Lake on our right, which is actually quite low right now. It's about 2 or 3 meters below normal levels because the snowpack hasn't melted yet in the mountains here. So once we got to Gold River, we explored the area a bit, and there's some pretty stunning scenery, as you can see here. Amazing waterfalls on the way out to the inlet just past Gold River. Beautiful little port there. You just don't get that kind of scenery if you're driving around the city. As you get out past Gold River on the way towards Tassus, the road turns to gravel. And we didn't go too far on this trip, but there's some pretty interesting places to go, like Upana Caves, which are some amazing caves that are free to explore by the public. So yeah, don't feel afraid to take your Tesla on gravel roads. We took a multi-hour trip on gravel roads between Port Hardy and Cape Scott a few years ago. So as long as you take it easy and go slow around the potholes, even a Model 3 can handle these types of roads without too much of a problem. So after heading down to the inlet there, we were heading back towards Gold River, and of course you can see there that the car is always telling us that we can't make it back to our destination because it only has the superchargers in its navigation system, which is a bit surprising. I'm actually disappointed they haven't managed to get the BC Hydro fast chargers into their system yet. But you just have to ignore that and trust your pre-planning and figure out where to go. So we headed back to Gold River, and we actually had some problems with the CHAdeMO adapter or the charger or something. What happened is the charger kept kicking out, sometimes after 25 minutes, sometimes after 5 minutes, and we had to restart it. We tried the second charger as well, but it gave us the same problems. But luckily, it didn't prevent us from getting enough of a charge to get back. So that's the kind of thing, of course, you have to be prepared for. Think about bringing your level 2 adapter, even your 110 volt plug to some of these places, because if the first plan of charging doesn't work out, you have to have some way of coming up with a plan B and C and so on. When I was heading up into northern BC, I actually brought a extension cord for a welding plug and phoned ahead to a welding shop because I knew I'd have to use that to charge up my vehicle up there at the time. So I'll leave it there for today in terms of the video. I hope this video gave you some ideas in terms of what you can do with your car. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and send me any of your feedback and ideas. And as always, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you're enjoying the content.